I'm delighted to have this opportunity to thank the people of Flanders, and especially Ypres and members of the Last Post Association, for continuing to honour the sacrifice of our fallen.
There is a man in England who has served the British Crown for over 6 decades without a single public scandal. He is 90 years old. He is the last living person who was alive during the reign of King George V. He stood beside Queen Elizabeth II on the Buckingham Palace balcony at her final Platinum Jubilee appearance. For 52 years, he handed Wimbledon trophies to the greatest tennis players on earth: Roger Federer, Serena Williams, Novak Djokovic, over 350 presentations, barely missing a single year. His name is Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent. And in the weeks following the death of his wife of 64 years, this man, a Field Marshal, the longest-serving Grandmaster of the Freemasons since 1967, the quietest and most trusted Windsor alive, has reportedly made a decision that has left Buckingham Palace with no idea how to respond. He has told those close to him exactly who he wants to inherit his legendary family jewelry collection. And the name he chose was not Queen Camilla. It was Catherine, Princess of Wales, future Queen of England. Stay with me, because before we can understand what the Duke's decision means, you have to understand 3 things: who this man actually is, what these jewels actually are, and why the palace is now sitting on a story it desperately does not want told out loud. The man the palace trusts most. You have to start with Edward George, because without him, none of this lands with the weight it deserves. The Duke of Kent is not a headline-grabbing royal. He is not the kind of man who calls up journalists or gives tearful interviews on American television. He is, in the truest and most complete sense of the phrase, Old Windsor. A man raised to believe that a royal does not complain and does not explain. A man whose entire public life has been built on quiet, unflinching institutional loyalty. The kind of loyalty that is invisible precisely because it never wavers. Think about what 6 decades of loyalty actually looks like in practice. He attended more than 350 Wimbledon trophy ceremonies from 1969 to 2021. He has been Grandmaster of the United Grand Lodge of England, the most senior Freemasons organization in the world, continuously since 1967. That is nearly 58 consecutive years of institutional authority that the vast majority of the British public does not even know exists. He is a Field Marshal, the highest rank attainable in the British Army. And here is the single detail that puts everything else in context. The Duke of Kent is the last surviving first cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, the very last living direct link to the generation that built the modern British monarchy. In June 2022, at the Platinum Jubilee, a photograph went around the world that very few people truly understood. The Queen stepped onto the balcony without Prince Philip for the first time. She was 96 years old. She was frail. There was one person standing right beside her. It was Edward. So when a man with that history, a man for whom staying silent and staying loyal are essentially the same instinct, reportedly breaks from that pattern and names a specific person to inherit his family collection, it is not background noise inside a tabloid gossip cycle. It is, for people who know this man and understand what he represents, a genuine earthquake. Now let's talk about his wife. Because the jewels at the center of this story were not just hers in any ordinary sense. They were the culmination of something utterly extraordinary. The Duchess the world never knew. Catherine Worsley, who became the Duchess of Kent, was unlike anyone the British royal family had ever produced before or has produced since. She was born a commoner, the first non-titled person to marry a royal duke in over a century. The duke's mother, Princess Marina, refused the match twice before finally, reluctantly giving her blessing. Catherine had already traveled to Canada alone, taken a Greyhound bus across an entire continent, and quietly waited for the man she loved to fight hard enough to win her the right to be with him. He did. And their story only became more remarkable from there. They married on June 8, 1961 at York Minster, in the first royal wedding held at that location in 633 years. 8 million people watched on television. And then Catherine did something that no royal before or since has ever really replicated. She disappeared into ordinary life, deliberately, completely, and without any apparent desire for recognition. For years, she drove a 400-mile round trip from London every single week to teach music at a primary school in Hull. Not a royal patron visit with cameras and handshakes. Not a scheduled charity appearance with a press secretary standing nearby. She taught children, week after week, year after year. And nobody, not the parents, not the students, not the other teachers, not anyone except the head teacher, knew who she was. She introduced herself simply as Mrs. Kent. She trained as a Samaritan and took anonymous crisis phone calls. She volunteered at a homeless shelter. She co-founded Future Talent in 2004 to support musically gifted children from economically disadvantaged families. In 1977, she gave birth 9 months into her pregnancy. The baby was stillborn. In an era when royals were expected to grieve privately and move on publicly, she spoke about the depression that followed, decades before any other member of the royal family dared to acknowledge mental illness out loud. And then, in 1994, she made the most explosive personal decision any senior royal had made in 3 centuries. She converted to Catholicism, becoming the first senior member of the British royal family to publicly do so since the Act of Settlement of 1701, the very law that had shaped the constitutional relationship between the crown and religion for nearly 300 years. When asked why, she said she had been struck by the humility of those she encountered in her new faith community. No grand statement, no political positioning, just a woman following her conscience. This is who the Duchess of Kent was, and this is the woman whose loss the Duke is now grieving. On the evening of September 4th, 2025, Catherine, Duchess of Kent, died peacefully at Kensington Palace, aged 92, surrounded by her family. And what happened in the 12 days that followed would expose tensions inside the royal family that the palace had spent years hoping the public would never notice. The jewels that survived a revolution. To understand why anyone inside the royal family would fight over the Kent collection, you first need to understand what it actually is. Because these are not beautiful accessories. They are a living archive of some of the most turbulent and violent centuries in modern European history. Every stone in that collection survived things that entire empires did not. The story begins in Russia. In a palace in St. Petersburg, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna possessed the finest private jewelry collection in the entire Russian Empire, second only to the Tsarina herself. When the revolution came in 1917, her son Boris and a British diplomat named Bertie Stopford disguised themselves as ordinary workmen, broke into the Vladimir Palace under cover of the chaos, and smuggled the jewels out in Gladstone bags. They were deposited in a London safety deposit box. 224 pieces, formally recorded by Garrards in January 1920, escaped the revolution entirely. Now follow the bloodline forward. Grand Duchess Vladimir's only daughter was Elena Vladimirovna of Russia. Elena's daughter was Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. That single bloodline is exactly how Romanov imperial jewels became Kent family jewels. Marina brought them across Europe when she married into the Windsor family in 1934. And Marina was already the most stylish royal on the entire continent before she ever arrived in Britain. London shops were selling copies of her signature hat designs within weeks of her engagement being announced. A specific shade of turquoise was named Marina Blue in her honor. The couturier Molineux called her the greatest single influence on fashion since Empress Eugénie. Queen Mary, who understood the cultural and historical weight of royal jewelry better than almost anyone in the 20th century, made sure Marina received the most historically significant pieces in the family's possession as wedding gifts. The most important of all was the Cambridge sapphire parure. a complete suite of sapphires and diamonds created for Princess Augusta of Cambridge in the 1830s, which had passed through 7 decades of royal women before reaching Marina's hands. When Marina died in 1968, the Duke was forced to sell several pieces almost immediately to cover death duties, a painful and very public stripping away of history. The Cambridge Sapphire Tiara was sold at Sotheby's in 1993, a Romanov diamond bow brooch that had traveled from the Vladimir Palace during the Revolution, sold at Christie's in 2012 for $842,500, 4 times its pre-sale estimate. The diamond girandole earrings that once hung in a palace that no longer exists are now reportedly owned by Kim Kardashian. But what remained was still deeply significant. The Kent pearl fringe tiara, believed to incorporate elements of a Vladimir piece, was publicly displayed as recently as 2022. Now ask yourself this question: what does it truly mean to inherit something like that? It is not simply jewelry. It is an unbroken material connection to a world the Revolution tried to erase. It is 4 generations of extraordinary women carried forward into the future in gold and sapphires and diamonds. Whoever holds those pieces does not just gain monetary value, and the monetary value is in the tens of millions of pounds. They accept the full weight of the story those pieces carry. And according to sources close to the Kent family, the Duke of Kent has decided exactly who deserves to carry that weight. The name no one expected. Here is the question I want you to sit with for a moment. Genuinely sit with it. If you were the Duke of Kent, 90 years old, having just lost the woman you loved for 64 years, reflecting seriously on your legacy and on a family collection that survived a revolution, 2 world wars, the collapse of an empire, and the death of a queen, who would you choose to carry it forward? That is not a rhetorical question. The Duke had to answer it for real. In the weeks following the Duchess's death in September 2025, sources close to the Kent family began sharing something that the palace immediately declined to address publicly. The Duke had expressed a clear and deeply personal wish. He wanted the remaining pieces, the historic sapphires, the Romanov-descended diamonds, the tiaras that had survived the destruction of an empire, to go to Catherine, Princess of Wales, not to Queen Camilla, not to any other senior female member of the family. To Catherine. And I want you to understand what it takes for a man like the Duke of Kent to do something like this. This is a man who has served the crown without controversy for 6 full decades. A man for whom institutional loyalty is not a strategy. It is a deeply held value. A man who has watched and supported every monarch since George VI. A man who, by his very nature and upbringing, does not make political gestures, does not send signals, does not play games. For him to name a specific beneficiary, to make his personal wishes known in a way that circulates through royal circles and eventually reaches the press, is not a casual act. It is not accidental, and it is not nothing. It is a statement. And the reason he reportedly chose Catherine reaches back not just through the Kent collection, but through the entire unspoken and deeply consequential battle over who the British monarchy belongs to next, the woman the Duke chose. In March 2024, Catherine sat on a bench at Windsor Castle and recorded a video message to the world. She said she had been diagnosed with cancer. She described the surgery, the shock of the discovery and the aftermath of what the palace had initially communicated as routine abdominal surgery and the chemotherapy that followed. She did not disclose the specific type. She said simply, "I am well and getting stronger every day." She appeared at Trooping the Colour in June 2024, visibly thinner, but upright and steady. She appeared at Wimbledon in July, where the crowd gave her a standing ovation. A spontaneous, unorchestrated outpouring that moved people who had never met her to tears. She appeared at the Cenotaph in November. She reappeared at Christmas. In January 2025, she announced remission. At a hospital visit in July 2025, she said something that no communications team could have written for her and no script could have replicated. You put on a brave face, stoicism through treatment, but actually the phase afterwards is really difficult. Those words did something that no official communication strategy could engineer. They made her undeniably real. And that realness is the single quality the British monarchy needs more desperately than any jewel in any collection. Because here is what the palace will not say out loud, but the numbers are now screaming. The British Social Attitude Survey, published in September 2025, found that only 51% of British people describe the monarchy as very or quite important, the lowest figure since records began. Among people aged 16 to 24, 67% said they would prefer an elected head of state. The numbers that had held the institution together for generations were finally moving in the wrong direction, and everyone inside the palace knew it. In that context, Catherine's recovery was not simply a personal story, it was an institutional event. The woman on whom the monarchy's long-term survival arguably depends most had faced something that could have taken her away entirely. And she came back, not with grand speeches or orchestrated moments, but steadily, visibly, and with that specific, unpolished honesty that makes millions of people feel they actually know her. By October 2025, YouGov recorded Camilla at 45% positive. Catherine stood at 73% positive. The Duke of Kent has served this institution long enough to understand what those numbers mean. Camilla's claim and the hierarchy that governs everything. Now, let's be honest about the other side of this story. Fairness demands it, and the truth demands it. Camilla is not a passive figure in any of this. She earned her place, and nobody reasonable disputes that. In the late 1990s, 2/3 of the British public actively opposed Charles becoming king if it meant Camilla becoming queen. The rehabilitation that followed was one of the most sustained and carefully managed image operations in modern royal history. Queen Elizabeth's February 2022 statement expressing her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort was the moment that sealed the transformation irreversibly. And Camilla has been active and deliberate in claiming her position within the hierarchy that governs royal jewelry. At a 2023 Mansion House reception, she wore the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, one of Queen Elizabeth's absolute favorites, seen on the late Queen at countless state occasions. At a 2024 state banquet, she surfaced the Queen Alexandra Kokoshnik tiara, which had not been seen publicly since 2015. At the November 2025 diplomatic reception, she appeared in the Breville Emerald Kokoshnik, previously worn by Princess Eugenie at her 2018 wedding. Royal jewelry historians named that Kokoshnik appearance the single biggest royal jewelry moment of 2024. Camilla is not passively occupying her place in the hierarchy. She is actively and visibly staking it. According to royal expert Katie Nicholl, the hierarchy governing these decisions is simple and essentially unyielding. The Queen Consort receives first choice. After her comes the Princess of Wales. After that comes everyone else. The wife of the reigning king gets the tools she needs to fulfill her constitutional role. The future queen waits her turn. That is the system. That has always been the system. So why does the Duke's alleged declaration matter so dramatically? Because the Kent jewelry is not part of that system. It never was, and never could be. The law that changes everything. Here is something almost nobody outside constitutional law circles fully understands about royal jewelry. The crown jewels, the imperial state crown, the orb, the scepter, the coronation regalia, belong to the nation. King James I established that principle in 1606. They pass automatically with the monarchy itself and cannot be individually inherited, gifted, or sold by any living person, including the monarch. Queen Elizabeth's personal collection is an entirely different legal category. It passed to Charles as part of her private estate, entirely tax-free under the 1993 Memorandum of Understanding on Royal Taxation, which exempts sovereign-to-sovereign inheritance from tax liability. Charles controls those roughly 400 pieces and loans them according to the hierarchy Nicol described. That is his right as the inheriting sovereign. But the Kent family jewelry is a completely different legal category from both of those. Those pieces are private property. They descended to the Duke of Kent from Princess Marina as personal possessions inherited through the Romanov-descended Vladimir line. They have never belonged to the crown. They have never been part of any royal loan system. They are his, as completely and legally as a family home or a private bank account. The king has no automatic legal claim to any of them. The duke can dispose of his own property however he chooses, through his will, through private gifts made during his lifetime, through any mechanism available to any private individual citizen in England. This is the legal reality that makes the duke's alleged declaration so significant. If he wants his remaining jewelry to go to Catherine, he can make that happen. Legally, nobody can stop him. The question is purely whether those around him would honor that expressed wish, or whether institutional pressure would quietly redirect things after the fact in a way the public would never know about. Royal wills are almost always sealed, a practice dating back to 1911. In 2021, the president of the family division confirmed that he personally holds more than 30 sealed envelopes in his private safe, each containing the will of a deceased royal family member, sealed for 90 years. Whatever the Duke's will eventually contains, the public will almost certainly never read it. But the wish has been spoken, and in royal circles, spoken wishes from men of the Duke's standing and history have a way of reshaping institutions long before any legal document is ever opened. The tiara that said everything. While all of this was unfolding through whispered channels and carefully guarded sources, the palace itself was already making its own statement, not in press releases or official communications, but in diamonds. In December 2025, Catherine walked into a state banquet at Windsor Castle, wearing Queen Victoria's Oriental Circlet tiara, 2,600 diamonds and rubies, designed personally by Prince Albert in 1853, and historically reserved by Queen Victoria's own explicit stipulation in her will, exclusively for queens. Catherine became the first princess, the first non-queen, ever to wear it publicly in its 172-year history. Let that land for a moment. A piece of jewelry that Queen Victoria herself specifically stipulated should only ever touch the head of a reigning queen was placed on the head of the Princess of Wales. The jewelry historians who saw the photographs understood immediately what was happening. This was not a styling decision by a palace dresser. This was not a spontaneous choice. This was a declaration from the institution itself about who it is building toward. And it sat alongside a pattern that had been building quietly and deliberately for 2 years. Catherine's most recognizable personal piece, the Cambridge Lover's Knot Tiara, made in 1913 for Queen Mary and famously worn by Princess Diana throughout the 1980s, had disappeared from public view for 18 years after Diana's death. Then in December 2015, Catherine wore it for the first time. It has become her most photographed royal piece ever since. Consider the layers of that symbolism. Queen Mary herself held both the title Duchess of Cambridge and the title Princess of Wales during her lifetime. Those are the exact 2 titles Catherine has held. The connection is not accidental. Nothing at this level of royal symbolism ever is. This is the real tension that the palace will never openly acknowledge. It is not a feud between 2 women. It is a collision between 2 timelines. Camilla holds the present. Catherine is being actively and unmistakably constructed as the permanent future. Both tracks are real, both are legitimate, and both are being managed simultaneously by a king who understands he is the bridge between them. And then a funeral arrived that neither track had fully prepared for. A funeral that became the most historically significant royal event in 5 centuries, and contained an empty seat that the palace could not explain away. The funeral that changed everything. On September 16, 2025, King Charles III sat inside Westminster Cathedral for a Catholic Requiem Mass for the Duchess of Kent. and became the first reigning British monarch to formally attend a Catholic service on UK soil since the Reformation ended Britain's relationship with Rome nearly 500 years ago. Think about what that means constitutionally, historically, and personally. As Supreme Governor of the Church of England, a man who had sworn at his own coronation to uphold the Protestant religion and the established church, he sat in a Catholic cathedral and participated in a Catholic Requiem Mass. He did not send a representative. He did not observe from a respectful distance. He sat inside and was visibly, deeply moved throughout. He did it as an act of personal love for a woman who had converted to Catholicism 31 years earlier and spent the decades that followed serving her faith with the same complete anonymity she had brought to everything else in her remarkable life. Prince William sat beside the king. Catherine was photographed quietly comforting King Charles at several points during the service, a gesture of genuine, visible tenderness that photographers caught and distributed around the world within the hour. Princess Anne attended. Prince Andrew attended in one of his rare recent public appearances. The Duke of Kent himself was present at 89, walking with a stick, his daughter Lady Helen Taylor beside him wearing her late mother's own diamond brooch and sapphire engagement ring as a private, deeply personal tribute. Every senior member of the Windsor family was inside Westminster Cathedral that afternoon, and Queen Camilla was not there. Camilla had traveled down from Scotland that morning and would resume her full public schedule the very next day, receiving Donald Trump at Buckingham Palace for the formal opening of his state visit. She was absent from a moment historians were already describing as unprecedented, present for a presidential welcome 24 hours later. The British public was now asking a question out loud, in comment sections and newspaper columns and ordinary conversations, that the palace had spent 3 full years desperately hoping would stay unspoken. And the answer to that question did not live in any official statement. It lived in legal documents and sealed wills, and the quiet, unshakable personal conviction of a 90-year-old man who has never put a foot wrong in 6 decades of public life. What comes next? So where does all of this leave us? The Duke of Kent is still alive, still quiet, still watching in the way that only someone who has watched this institution from the inside for 9 decades really can. His will is not yet a matter of public record, and in all likelihood never will be. The Kent jewelry collection is still in its cases, still waiting, still carrying the full, extraordinary weight of 4 generations of women and a revolution that tried and failed to erase them. But something fundamental has shifted, something that cannot simply be managed back into silence. The Duke's alleged declaration is not ultimately about jewelry. It is a statement about where he believes the living soul of the British monarchy actually resides. For a man who has watched and served this institution from the inside for over 6 decades, who stood beside Queen Elizabeth at her final public appearance, who has attended more royal events than almost any person alive, his reported choice of Catherine over Camilla carries institutional meaning that goes far beyond any individual stone or setting. The palace faces a crisis of relevance it can no longer hide behind its own polling numbers. Among young British people, the institution is actively losing the argument for its own existence, and the person in whom the palace has placed its longest-term generational bet is precisely the same person that the Duke, by every available account, wants carrying these particular jewels into the future. That alignment is not accidental. It is not coincidence. In royal circles, nothing that deliberate and that consistently repeated is ever coincidence. The palace has not spoken officially. The jewels have not yet moved. But the answer has already been given. In the tiaras placed on one specific woman's head at state banquet after state banquet, in a cathedral seat left conspicuously empty at the most historic royal funeral in 500 years, and in the quiet, earthquake-making private declaration of the last man alive, who stood at the very heart of the Elizabethan monarchy from its very beginning. Every institution eventually tells the truth about itself. The British monarchy is telling its truth right now, and the truth, it seems, has a name. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the Kent jewels belong with Catherine? Does the Duke's reported wish reflect something the palace has already decided? Or does Camilla's role as the reigning queen consort give her the stronger claim to this extraordinary collection? And here is the deeper question underneath all of it. When a 90-year-old man who has never once broken ranks in 6 decades of royal service finally speaks, does it matter? Does the palace honor that? Or does the institution quietly override the wishes of even its most loyal servants when the stakes are this high? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because this community's opinion on this genuinely matters. Share this with someone who follows the royals, because what is unfolding inside the Windsor family right now is unlike anything we have seen in a generation. Subscribe if you have not already, because the next chapter of this story is already forming, and when it breaks, you are going to want to be here.